Okay, I think we can start. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Me llamo Mónica Vargas.
Good morning, good afternoon. I am Mónica Vargas from TNI, the Transnational Institute, and I would like to welcome you to this virtual side event. I'm Mónica Vargas from the Transnational Institute. Welcome to this
the interpretation in the Zoom chat. You can have, sorry, in the Zoom menu, you have the access to the interpretation to English. And we will, almost all of us, do our interventions in Spanish. Entonces,
so thank you very much for being here. This side event has been organized against the framework of the 47th section of the Human Rights Binding Treaty, and our objective is very clear. It is to make sure that city law gets closer to the binding treaty process on human rights. It is a real privilege. It is the first time that we're trying this, so it is a real pleasure to be able to do so through these channels. This webinar or virtual side event, we have been organizing it from the global platform for the right to city, from the United States and global governments, including the social government, the Participatory Democracy and Human Rights platform, to make sure that we can put an end to corporate power and to put an end to their impunity. We are going to, I will now give you an overview of the program. We are going to start from an intervention of the Mayor of Grenoble, Mr. Eric Piolle, who will speak in French. Therefore, at that very moment, you will be able to listen to his interpretation into English to Spanish. He will be followed by Madam Amanda Flety from United Cities and local government. Later, we will listen to Irene Escorihuela from the Observatori DESC. And after that, we will listen to Miss Nathalie Rengifo from Corporate Accountability and the Global Campaign. And then we will listen to Carla Canal, who is the reference person on cohesion policies for global justice within the City Council of Barcelona. We will also see a round of questions and answers. So please put your answers not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box of Zoom. But we will also pay attention to what is being written down in the chat box. At the very end of the webinar, we will have a final round of interventions of the speakers, including Nelson Saule, who will articulate together the interventions that have been given, and he will also give us some final remarks on future action. Without further ado, I believe that we can start. I would like to make sure that Mr. Eric Piolle, the Mayor of Grenoble, is here with us and that he is ready to speak. Mr. Piolle. Yes, apologies. I'm just
greetings. I'm in a loud place. Well, anyway, so it's election time in France, and it's a little bit difficult to organize. We understand very much. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, says Monica. Could you maybe turn on your camera? Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this session. And it is something that is very close to my heart for two reasons. Firstly, as an elected official, it is of interest to me because these are issues that I address often. The role that companies play, the impact that that has on carbon emissions, on human rights. And then there's a second area. I worked a number of years in industry as a manager, and so I have actually lived this from the inside, these challenges, the responsibilities of companies. And at the time when I was active in companies, we tried to ensure that we had we tried to enshrine responsibilities. We tried to help subcontractors. We worked on respecting legislation, labor legislation, environmental legislation, and social legislation. We tried to make improvements in all of these areas. And so you can see this is something close to my heart. And with recent disasters that we have seen, for example, well, around the world, we have seen many natural disasters, or not natural, sometimes man-made disasters, the collapsing of factories, or I think that there were some very low levels of compensation which were offered to the victims, just 10,000 euros for the families of the victims in Bangladesh, and many refused to. There were the suppliers, the discount suppliers in Pakistan who had their factory burnt down. There was also the Human Rights Resource Center that put together a report and said that there were 2,000 cases of violence against defenders of rights who were opposing companies. So here we can see there are major challenges. And there is one issue that we really want to work on, which is to help companies, or to push companies, but then we also see that there are neoliberal possibilities of attacking states, and we have to bear that in mind because we see that justice is a great political challenge, both in terms of those who are accumulating profit, and we have seen this recently with Vattenfall that is asking for 5 billion euros from Germany following the withdrawal of Germany from nuclear power, and then roughly 1,000 complaints that have been issued by companies in terms of arbitration mechanisms and dispute settlement. So 90 million of public money that has been 90 billion of public money which has been given to companies, and they benefit from the legislation as it is now, and the ruling was to defend public interests, but we can see that that's clearly not the case. We have Baring Gold attacking Pakistan, asking for huge amounts of compensation following the government's decision to stop a mining contract, and so we can see a lot of examples of this. And then on another hand, we are also looking a bit, well, everywhere around the world, really, I'd say so, in many different places here in Europe and elsewhere, there are efforts being made to push for legislation which gives rights to workers, to groups, to collectivities, and to groups that come together, that organize. And this is what we have done in the city of Grenoble. We have brought a case to the court against Total, the oil company, with several different groups, NGOs involved, France Nature, and a coalition of mayors who have concerns about the environment. And here, our aim was to point to the inaction of Total, the oil company. They are one of the 20 biggest companies who cause climate change and carbon emissions, and they continue to emit at such high levels. And this means that now we are seeing what well, you saw in the report that was published today. You can clearly see that inaction is very much, well, Total are very much guilty. They have invested huge amounts of money in they have huge investments in dirty energy and very few investments in, just 2% of their investments in renewable energy. And this is crazy in 2021. And now in France, we are starting to see some improvements. In 2017, France voted on one of the first pieces of legislation, which calls civil, it actually points to the civil responsibilities of companies, and in terms of the activities that they cause, not only their own activities, but also those who give orders and work with their suppliers and their subcontractors. So this is a really advantageous piece of legislation for us. It's something that we can use in campaigns, and the challenge is great. We very much realize that that it's often the most vulnerable populations that are the most exposed. And the largest 40 companies on the stock exchange, they have 37 billion in terms of profits, despite the fact that we are in a big crisis. The NGOs well, the Oxfam report said that every time that they increase 1,000 in profits, they emit a huge amount of CO2. And so we can see that they are on a trajectory which means that we're going to see a 3 Celsius rise in temperatures. And this is because of companies. And in France, we can see clearly who is responsible. We can see an increase in poverty. And we see this at the moment with the events that are currently taking place. And this major social inequality is underscored in Oxfam's report. They said that 10%, the 10% wealthiest in France emit 18 tons of CO2 per person. And so this is manifold. This really doesn't help us to reach our aims. And so we are at 2 times what we should be seeing. There is a dimension of responsibility in terms of human rights, environment rights. There's a legal battle between those defending social rights and environmental rights and those on the other side. And I can conclude by saying that for Europe, there is a field where Europe can actually be a leader, where we can be a pioneer. We can help in this transition and promote new types of justice, new forms of jurisprudence, which gives rights to groups, to collectivities. So this gives, I often have to measure the potential of the transition, and I can see that we need climate justice and not profit justice. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Posibilité. Vale, pues eso, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much to the email Grenoble. This was a huge privilege, especially this work that the email Grenoble and Grenoble have been carrying out is an excellence. And we will also listen to later on an intervention from the mayor of Barcelona. We would like to remember that Mr. Eric Piolle has reunited many mayors that signed this call upon the binding treaty of the United Nations, and that creates a key space in terms of local authorities to support this new binding instrument that would allow us to go beyond the voluntary code, which is currently approved internationally, to transnational corporations when it comes to human rights. So the size of this local network is key in this sense. I would now like to leave the floor to Amanda Flety. Amanda comes from the Social Inclusion and Participatory Democracy and Human Rights of UCLG, and she will give us a perspective on the work that they're carrying out in terms of rights in the city and to the city. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Monica, for inviting me. And I would like to start by greeting the Mayor of Grenoble. I know that that Grenoble is a very active city in general, and I would invite Grenoble to be even more active when it comes to social responsibilities and rights. This is a first attempt to open a dialogue, and I would like to thank TNI for this space. It is an attempt at reorganizing the role of local governments and how they can have an impact on the topic of the accountability of transnational cooperation in terms of the social challenges of the society. That is, how can we make sure that transnational corporations, above all, commit to respecting human rights and to change the impact and consequences that they might have at a local level? I believe that Mayor Piolle has already given us an idea of how a city can be the leader of collective action to put pressure on corporations, and it is a positive topic to understand how we can deal with these economic actors, considering the private-public relationship, which also includes the privatization of public services. We are talking about a huge debate that has started several years ago, but we have not gone very far, unfortunately, in this. That is why I would like to tell you about the work that we've been carrying out over the last few years. The Social Inclusion Commission has worked very hard on the right to the city, which includes the challenges implied by globalization and also other world phenomena, international phenomena, and at the same time, from the local level, how can we rethink our response in terms of the social function on the city, and also how can we co-create cities to achieve new models of sustainable urban and rural areas that at the same time respect human rights and the needs of their inhabitants, all of this being at the center of the role of these areas. That is why we are strictly relating this to the binding treaty, and we can also relate it to the private and public sphere, because the common points, the common items are many. For example, we could mention a few examples, but we can also think of those cities that are living the direct consequences of the abuse of human and natural resources. For example, we're thinking of the access to water. Unfortunately, we could not have the Valparaiso region speaking here today with us, but in relation to that context, the use of water as a natural resource to grow avocados internationally, this is having a huge impact, which is implying a lack of water resources for the community, the local community of the Valparaiso. The consequence was that the new governor of Valparaiso has become a defender of this topic, this huge problematic topic in the region. Therefore, here we see a bigger commitment of the local level in terms of achieving change from a socio-economical point of view, and also having an impact on those big international economic actors such as transnational corporations. The question here is, how can we improve the socio-economic dialogue, our instruments to make sure that transnational corporations respect us and at the same time commit to lower their level of illegal action and their social impact and their environmental impact. We have seen this issue also in terms of housing, because the environment is only just one of the topics involved here. I'm also thinking of different impacts in terms of building houses, because we see in this period that all of these phenomena are implying an increased construction of cities and therefore a greater use of natural resources. So we can use this process, this local process, to also oblige corporations to respect human rights. And I would now like to conclude by talking about what we should do in this very moment, and that is visibilizing these issues, exploring the tools and instruments that we might use and that we can share, so that all of the local networks can understand and get more involved in this dialogue, in the socio-economic dialogue in relation to these human rights violations and natural resource violations. And at the same time, we want the local levels to work on their concerns of the impact of transnational corporations on climate change. And with this, I have concluded, and will now leave you the time to answer to some questions from the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your intervention. I believe that has already allowed us to present in a very detailed way the idea of the city services and the right to the city and public and private services. I would also like to remember that in our campaign to dismantle corporate power, the our campaign can only be built from the grassroots, which is why the local networks are key. And we will now see with the next network, with the next speaker, that it is from organized communities that so much can happen. We'll now leave the floor to Irene Escorihuela. She is from the Observatori of Barcelona and also belongs to the network on the right to city.
Greetings. Yes, well, I wanted to speak a little about what is happening in cities, and in previous statements we had heard already about the situation at the moment, what are the main challenges, but I believe that also from the perspective of social movements, civil society, there have been many interesting campaigns and discussions have been taking place whereby it has been said that a binding treaty on transnational companies would be of great interest. And as has been said, cities have become depossessed places, areas where capital accumulates. This is what urban areas are like now. And the social dynamics have changed, and the dynamics of capitalism mean that the citizens have suffered, not just in Barcelona. I'm just speaking about where I know, but in the global north and in the global south, in many cities, we've seen the same thing. Many investment funds, vulture funds, as they're often called, big companies coming in, and that exacerbates the situation in cities. And I think that this trend, well, it really depends on what we're talking about, but above all, we have seen since 2013, the situation has been getting much worse in Barcelona. And we're really seeing how cities are more and more just, they're just there for the show. They're like spaces just for business, just for companies, just for transnationals. They're not places for people to actually live side by side and enjoy life with each other. And so I'll just put on my timer just to make sure I don't go over time. There are several different campaigns that have been led at international level with different names, with different mottos. For example, cities are for those who live there, cities are not for sale, cities are for the people. And these are very interesting spaces where we have been able to bring together different organizations, international platforms such as the Platform for the Rights of the Cities. They have made their significant contributions. And before the pandemic, this was already being discussed, but now it is all the more important. It's incredibly difficult to live in cities, not only because of large companies, but there's also other investment funds in the background. And so visibility has been made for this, and in 2013, 2014, it was said that the next investment niche will be urban areas, and particularly homes. And the right to living in a home is an issue that we have been working on. And when we speak about the right to the city, there is a collective element to it, and there are many issues to discuss, but while transnational companies have been playing a very important role in this, and I think that a speculative investment in homes is very important, because on the one hand, we are trying to protect the right to living in a home, but on the other hand, it's what we're seeing is that there is a property business, a big real estate, and they are being very creative, incredibly creative. There are economic reports that speak about this. Over the last few years, the returns they've had, the profits in terms of real estate has exploded. And there's a whole process here. The financing rent, for example, that's been a big investment niche over the last few years. And then on the other side of the coin, there's also the issue of the fact that people are not able to access their right to living in a home. And there are many vulture funds as well that speculate with any type of good that they have, all different types of goods, and homes should be a right, but this is opaque and it is not regulated. And this is where international spaces such as the binding treaty have a role to play. In the United Nations, the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Committee was saying that the situation of homes in Spain, where there are a huge percentage are in private hands, and who is regulating this market? We cannot just leave it without any types of regulation, and the Spanish government didn't know how to respond. There is serious investment in the real estate, but it's all very opaque. Nobody knows who is investing or who is allowed to invest, and so it's important to understand what is happening, understand how things are being coordinated at the national level. And we know that many problems have many problems exist in several different countries. Countries face the same problems. And then cities are at the front line of human rights issues often. We know that when we have a problem, when the citizens suffer attacks on their rights, we have to go to public authorities because those are the ones who are closest, who are there, who are supposed to solve our problems and protect our rights and provide services. They are supposed to be places where people can come together, spaces without discrimination, and that help enshrine people's rights. But we're seeing the opposite. We are seeing that these public services are being sold off, not only in terms of real estate, but also private companies that manage public transport and hiking up the prices. And the mayor of Grenoble mentioned a few similar examples. And then public space, how is it actually used? There are several different businesses there, and then the right to a home, the right to a city. Well, we can see that there is great commercialization taking place. And so what's happening with the vulture funds? There are many cases, as we were hearing, there's the example of Barcelona, and ultimately these are international processes and global processes that we are witnessing, and these are investment funds that have their headquarters in the United States or anywhere around the world, but they have lots of branches that reach out into different parts of the world, into people's homes. And then there may be a company that belongs to one different parent company, and it's very difficult to understand the whole web of how everything is entangled and connected. These investment funds, who is actually responsible for them as social movements? It's very difficult to understand these issues, and it's difficult for the people. So we may say that there's a property company in Barcelona, but it's not their responsibility because they have a different office in New York, they have an office somewhere else in London, and there's no accountability. I am a tenant and I want to speak to my landlord or the owner of this building, and it's very difficult because it's not clear who the owner is or who is responsible, and when rights are attacked, then everything becomes diluted and unclear. And Blackstock is also an example. At an international level, there have been several campaigns internationally about denouncing their activities, doing this on social networks, and the previous rapporteur of the United Nations, Leilani Farah, on accommodation and home issues, worked with activists, and they denounced the damaging effect of Blackstone, this big company, in attacking human rights and particularly the right to a home. And they sent out letters to several different countries, including Spain. And this is documented by transnational. These activities by transnationals have been documented, and efforts are being made by activists to delve into them. So it's quite clear that the property market is unregulated, and at an international level, the private sector could enter. It is free to enter, and at local level, efforts have been made. So in Barcelona, there have been fines, and 2 vulture funds left buildings completely empty just to speculate on them, and we denounce that. And it's clear that many investment funds appeal, and then the legal process becomes very long, and having a clearer process would be of great help. And then just to finish up, I wanted to mention the case of Airbnb. Now, obviously, this is different. We're talking about how platforms can affect how people live in cities, and it's not just Airbnb, it's also Deliveroo, and there are several different rulings and cases of those who do deliveries and their rights, many cases. But when speaking about Airbnb in particular, at local level, efforts have been made to regulate Airbnb with different types of legislation and regulations, but the company systematically appeals, above all in European courts, and they have tried to offer the lowest amount of information. Not much data is released. They're very opaque, lacking in transparency, and they say that it's that they need to protect the private data, and so governments cannot fine, they cannot issue fines because they don't have the data to do it. And there are some unlicensed buildings that are rented out, and there are large companies behind, often large landowners or property owners, and often you could have people paying proper rent and living normally as a tenant, but Airbnb prevents that. And so we have local elected officials who have been putting out demands in this area. And I would just finish by saying that it's very important to guarantee the right to homes, and the right to a home is incredibly important, and we have to think about this. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you very much, Irene. I think that you have talked about the general overview of the topics that relate to the right to city in general. It was a very complete intervention, and perhaps we could also mention another more or less related topic, the obstacles that cities have to overcome, or the state had to overcome when it comes to implement policies that might affect the actions of transnational corporations and that might cause them to be brought to justice. And we're also talking about the protection on investments and the arbitration system. We are talking about asymmetry that is above the international system of human rights, right? So considering the symmetry, considering this important process of the Binding Treaty of the United Nations to oblige and regulate, as Irene said, transnational corporations to respect human rights, I'm thinking of the network that is focusing on this, the global network on dismantling corporate power, and together with other networks, we are trying to work on this treaty because we want it to be effective when it comes to justice. And perhaps I could add that here in Catalonia, there is an advanced process in terms of regulating corporate transnational corporations through a human rights center, within which the Observatori desk is also active. So we could say that this is a rather advanced process in this sense. I will now leave the floor to Nathalie Rengifo.
Miembro de la campaña global para...
También ella...
Y nos va a dar una introducción articulando, obviamente, con el derecho a la ciudad que se ha desarrollado anteriormente.
Speech on how we want to dismantle corporate power, and she will also introduce the binding treaty and the challenges that we have to face in this sense. Thank you, Nathalie. The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you to all of the organizers of this event for inviting me. I would like to start with a brief summary, such as some of my comments I've already done, to just give you an overview of these topics. When we think of the fields of action of some transnational corporations, such as the hydroelectric ones, the hydrocarbon ones, the agro-industry, tourism industry, those that act in the rural areas, this field commercial field. This is where the actions are centered towards the urban areas, cities, to make sure that they can achieve their earnings. And it is within our cities that corporate power is taking advantage of us. It is here in the cities where we see the impact of the lobbies of corporate influence, and we'll see how public policies respond to corporate interests and to corporate profits. And just as Mayor Piolle said, it is here that we breathe the corporate power, not just simply literally because of pollution and because of polluting gases, but it is in every city of the world that we can feel corporate power. It is there where we buy things, in public services, it is in what we eat and what we drink, and the internet, and gases. As our comment Irene, they are there in our housing, in our in those areas that are bought by them, purchased by them, and therefore causing gentrification, and those public services that are purchased and become private, in the fees that we pay to go from one city to another, and that only goes to the benefits of corporations. And that happens in every activity that we carry out. And if at any moment, for example, as we were saying in Colombia, if this system that is trying to drown us, this neoliberalist, patriarchal system doesn't allow us to go out and protest, it is that corporate hand that is trying to take us down and takes away our liberties and sometimes even our life, because of that so-called public force, those armed forces that only work at the service of transnational corporations and in the interest of their profits, as we are seeing in many countries here in Latin America. And that goes on when we think of the penitentiary system, where in many countries of the world, it is a system that is only useful for corporations and for their profit. It is for this reason that in the global campaign to dismantle corporate power and from the people's struggle, we have seen that claiming for sovereignty and dismantling corporate power and claiming for putting an end to impunity, all of this has to be a urban struggle as well as a rural struggle, but above all a urban struggle that needs to take over all of the streets and institutions of the cities. We're also thinking of the value chain that is being analyzed in some policies here in Geneva and in the United Nations in general, and that responds to the working group created in 2014 as a result of the 24/6 resolution. It is an instrument that we need to claim our democracy, to claim reparations, and to oblige the state in the sense of respecting and protecting human rights, and at the same time to hold transnational corporations accountable for their violations. At the same time, we're also talking about the obligation to give reparations for the violations of transnational corporations and to protect their citizens from the lucrative interests of corporations. However, this treaty goes beyond this, and it also gives direct obligations to transnational corporations. This treaty implies, for example, the obligation on not taking any measure that might cause any hazard to human lives, for example, forced labor and demolishing housing, and it is also causing immediate termination of contracts that have been ratified already, and it also establishes civil and criminal responsibilities. That it gives them the obligation of giving their workers decent working conditions, and to stop any activities that might undermine the obligation on the state to protect and defend the human rights of their citizens. And at the same time, the corporations cannot mobilize their labor forces, they cannot contact any private militia to attack or threaten the local communities. As we have seen in Colombia, this is happening, for example, when it comes to claiming reparation against the transnational corporations. Furthermore, one of the articles that generates most visibility on this so-called value chain, when it comes to finding the right person that we need to hold accountable for this real estate issue. There are many details that are involved, and for the global campaign, we want this local movement to join the global movement and work all together for the global binding treaty. This is just a beginning, but this treaty has been created, starting from the basis, upon the grassroots, on the basis of the damages, of the concrete damages that has been caused by transnational corporations. I will now leave you space for questions. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathalie Rengifo, for your complete presentation. I would perhaps like to remind you that the binding treaty process was preceded by the intervention of the Ecuador ambassador in Geneva. This person that presides this open commission on the study of the binding treaty. Unfortunately, this person could not be here with us today, but we will ask him to send us the recording. We will send him the recording of this event, because we are talking about key content for the elaboration of the binding treaty in relation to what is happening in Ecuador. We will now give the floor to Carla Canals. She will make an intervention as the reference person for coherence in policies from the Barcelona municipality. And we would like to remember that the city of Barcelona, as well as Grenoble and other cities, they are working on the respect of the rights of their citizens, and they've also gone from the development of rights, and they moved on to a new organization there in Barcelona. So Carla is going to tell us what is happening in Barcelona. So Carla, welcome, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Monica. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. And congratulations for your initiative, for your great initiative. It is true that for many years, the Barcelona City Council has been carrying out actions along this line. I would also like to say that I've been working in the City Council in Barcelona, but there are also other institutions that have been working on public policies for global justice. And first and foremost, I would like to stress the importance of this binding treaty, and more concretely, I would like to explain to you the resources that a city council has to move forward in this sense, and also the tools that we use in our working group and in the city, because I believe that we can help each other among cities, and we have learned all of these things from other cities and institutions. So very briefly, first and foremost, the coherence of public policies for justice, for global justice, is fundamental. Otherwise, we end up achieving contradictory policies. And in this sense, we need to have responsible, accountable public tenders. We're also talking about ethical finance, which is a topic that we've been working on in depth, and we look for a change of paradigm, a shift in paradigm, not just from the point of view of the municipality, but in general for the citizens. And then we're also thinking about the departments can feed into each other and they can work together, but also in terms of other governmental levels, such as the Generalitat, the Spanish state, the EU. So when it comes to talking about public purchases that are accountable, and also when it comes to the value chain, we are asking the enterprises to carry out due diligence, but the very first who are in charge of those responsibilities, it is the state and public institutions. And at the same time, we have the resources to demand due diligence. We have carried out various internal analysis to understand in which fields due diligence was being carried out effectively. Sometimes there are some products and sectors that are faring better in this sense. And I must say, in the sense that I'm very thankful for the work that we've been doing with the civil society. When we think of electronics, pharmaceuticals, food. We have been working so much with the civil society, because it is inevitable that we put together all of these works and all of the possible alternatives together with civil society organizations. To be even more concrete, the area where I work, we are focusing on 3 aspects when it comes to due diligence. 1, we have a call for subventions. That is, there are some NGOs that represent us on public or responsible public purchases towards the territory and towards the citizens. Secondly, as you can see in the chat box, I have just shared with you some studies that we have made. And then finally, the internal external advocacy. It is true that I don't have many minutes left, but okay, thank you. I can speak a bit longer. Great, thank you. I would like to use this space also to say that over the last few years, we have learned together with public entities from many other countries, from the UK, for example, and from NGOs and organizations that work in the field with producers and NGOs that work on human rights. We have worked together, we have learned together to move forward on due diligence. And I believe that, well, right now with Barcelona, we participate in Electronics Watch, which is a network that tries to move forward on due diligence in IT and above all hardware more than software. And we participate in an international project called Make the City Fair, where many municipalities and institutions participate. And thanks to them, we have managed to move forward on concrete criteria such as public tenders and public purchases, making advocacy work, doing advocacy work within businesses as well. And one of the works that we have shared the most, focusing on health, it was an informal type of work, and I was hoping that an institution could hopefully promote an international working group on responsible public procurement, because we participate in European projects as well as informal working groups where we see officials and managers of public procurement that do not see a way of moving forward in terms of human rights. And therefore, I believe that those formal working groups that depend on the institutions are very important. In this sense, we have been part of a working group together with other nations such as the UK. There we also wrote to the WHO to asking for more specific work in terms of healthcare in relation to the external world. We're thinking, for example, of face masks and other equipment. And for that, we need specific or general working groups on businesses, on products, on healthcare. And I don't know if with this I've managed to express myself clearly. What I want to stress is that we work together with NGOs, other administrations, and that this work within the network is fundamental to move forward. And that we also work with trade unions and a few more networks at international level. All of this for the sake of the Binding Treaty. Thank you so much, Carla, for your intervention. I believe that to contribute so much of this on this aspect that is public procurement. And it is in that way that we can ask the corporation to be more accountable. And secondly, you also talked about the needed support of public services or of international entities that can all contribute to the binding treaty process, as well as the work with trade unions. Great, so we will now move on to the next session of our event.
Eric Pure, do we have you with us? We have a question. We have a question which is the following. So, Mr. Pure, are you here with us? Can you give us your question just to make sure? Otherwise, I'll go on to another question. Okay, so in that case, I'll move on to a different question and then we can go back with the mayor. So this question is, we have a question here for Amanda. So how are cities mobilizing? How can they mobilize so as to convince governments that are reluctant to take part in the negotiations on the treaty? Are there initiatives that are taking place, that are being developed so as to have a transnational approach for cities? This is one question. And then another question, which is maybe for Irene, we can ask her to answer. So this is related to the right to the city. And the question is the following: the issue of the right to the city has not been directly part of the discussions in the UN process on the binding treaty, despite it being a key topic. So the question is, how can we mobilize so that we can include this issue in discussions? And then how can we mobilize our work on the binding treaty with other relevant processes at other levels regarding the right to the city? So another question which is more related to the binding treaty, maybe this is more for Nathalie. What measures are established in the binding treaty and by the global campaign to avoid political influence of transnationals in the negotiation process? So if you like, we can start with these last few points. I don't know if Amanda, you would like to start. Please go ahead. Yeah, just to understand the question. So it's what collective measures exist to apply pressure on national governments? Is that right? Is that the question? Maybe we could repeat the question. Yes, 1 second. So how are cities mobilizing? How can cities mobilize so as to convince governments and states that are reluctant to take part in negotiations on the binding treaty? And are there any initiatives that are being developed in this way? Can we take part in them? And so that we can have transnational defense? Yes, okay. So we have been trying to push these collective dynamics, connecting these cities among themselves first and foremost. And so we have worked a lot on the right to a home, and this is one of the greatest challenges. The impact is immense, really. And so we have tried to develop a collective dynamic with the UN rapporteur and with other social organizations. And we've been strengthening dialogue, and this has led to the publication of a declaration on cities for living in. And there are several challenges that we've been looking at. And it was one initiative of cities that wanted to come together and denounce and criticize the impact of transnationals on homes, the impact at local level, the fact that city centers are being hollowed out because of prices going up, and then controls and regulations that can be done at local level using local public policy. So these efforts that we have been making over the last few years. And as Eric Piolle was saying, that there are other initiatives to develop a legal battle as well, so that we can have a direct impact on companies, to bring pressure to bear on them. But these are tools that are maybe newer ones, and Barcelona has been quite advanced in this work that has been done, legal work, and so how to put pressure on national states, and how is it that we can try to ensure that they are more closely involved in the binding treaty. Well, these are complicated issues because in general cities have, well, there is that we are at a time when we are receiving all of the recovery plans after the pandemic, and where there is a lot of money that has been given to a few companies so that they can carry out certain activities. And there is one area of impact that we have to work on in terms of responsibility and accountability. Companies have to be accountable for the money that they receive. We need criteria for how they're spending the money that governments give them. And so we need to think of this in France, for example. Air France received huge amounts of money. So how can we ensure that they actually reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in exchange for the money that they're receiving? Because they are operating at a much lower level at the moment, so they have capacity to improve their emissions. And so actors have to come together and discuss where is the public money actually going and how can we use it to bring about a true recovery. And so in this way, well, we have to ensure real commitment to human rights, as we had mentioned before. So that's my answer. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. And now Irene or Nathalie would like to speak, and then we can move on to Mr. Irene or Nathalie, one of you? So I think this is more for Nathalie. So what measures are there in the treaty to reduce the political influence of transnationals? And Irene, maybe we could ask you the following. Taking into account that this event is being organized in the framework of the United Nations, what are the international human rights measures that can be applied, and in particular in terms of the right to the city, and what can be done so that we have can improve? So now over to Nathalie. Yes, just 1 point on what Amanda was saying. So I wanted to say that the experience in Latin America of connecting our experiences, but also connecting or sharing those successful cases, the best practices when citizens and different groups affected by transnationals have come together and improved human rights and environmental issues. They've looked at protecting Mother Earth, the Pachamama, and they have had, this has been directly related to the climate crisis. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect what is happening in the Amazon in Ecuador with what is happening elsewhere, the transnationals in Brazil. We're linking that up with what other corporations, hydrocarbon corporations are doing in Argentina, in Patagonia. And all of this has allowed us to understand that the architecture of corporate impunity is the same. The means that they use, the resources, the way they do this, the way the strategies used by companies in terms of impunity is the same, both here and in the Niger Delta, for example. In Nigeria, it's the same, regardless of where it is. So there are great efforts being made to share successful experiences and also to share the experiences which have allowed impunity to continue, so that we can be more aware, so that communities can be stronger in the work that they do. And we have also seen that there, in the region and around the world, in fact, there has been a resurgence of cases of there have been legal cases brought to court about transnationals' responsibility. We've been seeing that more and more. And then there's a case in the Netherlands where a company, well, Shell, was deemed responsible for climate change. And we have also seen this in Colombia. We saw that a group of young people demanded the Amazon to be protected and respected. And we also have cases in the United States and in other parts of the world as well. So I would really say that we need to be able to share these cases. This is part of what the global campaign is about. We have to share these cases. We need a space so that different movements, different communities, those affected can all come together and share their experiences. And regarding the question on specific measures to avoid undue influence of transnationals on political decision making, well, there's work done at a national level, at a regional and international level. And so the planned treaty, the draft treaty, has a number of measures. So there has to be transparency, and there have to be obligations on states, and issues that, well, states have to adopt certain measures to provide protection, whether it be conflicts of interest or prohibition of preventing rotating doors, where you've got people going from companies into the public sector and vice versa, and then providing accountability measures that are appropriate, and actually making things visible, having documents that are available for everybody, for public, the contracts that are agreed between transnational companies and others. This information should be made public. And there's also bans, not just for rotating doors, but also for the fact that members of government should not be part of transnationals and vice versa. We've seen this happening all over the world. And at the moment, we're also looking at banning public employees from receiving gifts, receiving presents, receiving donations from transnational companies. And then we've also got a number of articles where states are requested to have measures so as to stop dirty issues taking place with transnationals. So I think I can leave it there.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. We have many questions, we've had many interventions, and now I would like to ask for some very brief answers. Then we will listen to your last interventions, and then we'll listen to Piolle. Irene, for yours. Yes, and I was also supposed to reply to the other question, right? I'm going to ask you something very difficult, which is replying to both answers together and trying to speak a bit more slowly for the interpreters. Yes, so as for what has just said Nathalie, I believe it is important to, when it comes to the last question, to think of the United Nations sphere and also the human rights space at the regional level, European level, Pan-American level, because it is important to see how some those legal systems are advancing when it comes to corporations. For example, because of climate change, we have been seeing some cases where corporations and the state are, well, the international courts are asking them to hold themselves accountable in terms of climate change and the violation of the rights of the citizens. In this sense, we believe that it is important to keep this in mind. We could work together with the United Nations, with the commissions and committees, with the courts that work on these topics. And in this sense, well, for example, us as observers, we also work in the DESC network. And so we need to understand that we need to focus not simply on the responsibility of the state and the government, but also of the local level. So I believe that this event is perhaps a first step in this sense. And as I was saying, we need to strengthen our works in those different spaces, working together with civil society organizations and their networks. And then finally, we need to create alliances. But as you all know, the right to the city is not the right to living in the city, but the connection between rural areas and urban areas. So how cities are also responsible for what we give to the rural areas. So we know that there are some very vulnerable aspects in this sense that must be taken into consideration. Thank you very much, Irene. And I would like to ask the panelists that are not speaking if they could please turn off their microphones. And I would now like to ask Mr. Piolle if he would like to answer to a question that we received from the audience. This is the question. Some transnational corporations of urban services are French, such as CEST and Piolle. What kind of solidarity can we build between cities to defend the models of municipalization of water and energy? What did Grenoble do in this sense? For example, what happened in 2012 about as a green European capital of the EU? Could Grenoble become an example of promoting the right to the city and of the changes needed in the cities and public services? Is Mr. Piolle here?
Yes, I am.
Would you like me to say it again? It's okay? All right.
No,
great.
that's fine. OK. Je vais répondre en français ou en anglais, mais en français, c'est bon. Oui, oui c'est une excellente question. Alors, attendez, il faut que je coupe la traduction parce que sinon, j'ai un retour.
Question.
Audio origine.
It is indeed an important question about natural resources, important natural resources such as water. Locally, Grenoble on water has been one of the leading cities at the end of the previous decade. We now have a team that has been working lower France, and we've also been focusing on international policies. We are already part of the network of the cities built in Barcelona in 2017. We are also part of another network that includes about 50 cities against the treaty with the Atlantic, Transatlantic Treaty. Apologies, Mr. Piolle. Unfortunately, we have a problem with the interpretation into Spanish. Can you hear the interpretation into Spanish? Just a second. Can you hear the interpretation into Spanish? Can you hear the interpretation into Spanish? Can you hear interpretation into Spanish? So as I was saying, in 2016 and even before 2010, Grenoble was already carrying out courses on this topic in France, and it is an important subject for international cooperation. We are part of the Barcelona network that was launched in 2017. We're also part of the TAFTA network, and we've also been chosen to become the European capital in this sense. And so they were saying how in the 1890s, the city of Grenoble launched the debate of the municipalization of water, which is an advancement at the city level in terms also of we also mentioned the TAFTA agreement, which is the agreement between the Americas and Europe. And so the mayor was also saying how they are part of some of these processes with the other 50 cities. Grenoble also mentioned the involvement of Grenoble within the network launched in Barcelona in 2017, and network that is committed to the change of public services, also in terms of the impact of water. And as I was saying, these groups are major actors when it comes to water. As you said, they are French actors. And unfortunately, we are surrounded by these actors all over. We see them all over the place. And what we can do anyway is to focus on the public aspect of it, on the public management of it. And France has been focusing on this. We try to build policies for a fair use of water, considering that water is a key resource, not only economically, but also for local communities. And we know that with a view to 2022, when we will be the capital of Europe, we are going to continue building policies in this sense. As the mayor said, Grenoble is going to become the green capital of Europe, and it is against this framework that we can promote international cooperation. And in this sense, the mayor said that the importance of international cooperation is key, not only to react to local challenges, but also to the action of those French actors that have been mentioned. And this means developing policies that take into account the actions of those corporations. Additionally, we need a transport analogy in terms of the answers that we are giving as cities. We need to exchange them, not only regionally or nationally, but also internationally, on how the local communities can achieve their own sovereignty of their power, and how we can manage our knowledge and exchange experiences, and how we can promote those models of a local development. Grenoble has already started to have this experience of technology transfer, and this is also a process that is part of a political framework that is taking action on corporate power. Thank you so much for that summary, and we are now at the very last part of our webinar. We're now going to ask Ness and Saule that it may help us to conclude this event. Unfortunately, we have fewer minutes than you would think. Could you please speak Spanish? Thank you so much. So, good morning, here from Brazil, from Sao Paulo. And first and foremost, I don't know if you all know my platform, it is an articulation of different international networks that work on the perspective of just, inclusive cities. We are working with more than 150 organizations on this perspective, and all of these, all of the members of the network are very committed to this work. We are adhering now to the campaign, the global campaign on the Binding Treaty on Corporate Power, exactly because we have this vision of the right to city as a collective right, and we have struggled over the last few years for the inclusion of the right to city within international human rights, and we discussed that in many conferences locally. Considering all of that has been said, I would like to contribute with the perspective of the connection to the binding treaty, that is the necessity of holding the right actors accountable. First and foremost, I would like to highlight two aspects that seem really important and that are key to the process that you are working on as organizations. One is the question of democracy and political participation. It is a clear component. Cities are clearly part of this as political actors, and the citizens are part at the heart of the city. And this should be a part of the treaty, also in the sense of the participation, which is already a chapter of the treaty. We need to add there the possibilities of exploring further actions that need to be decided by the people, the populations and the citizens of the cities. Because all these actions are not part of a democratic process. We are talking about urban intervention, services, and all the elements I have already mentioned. This is a key issue, including the idea of the necessity of decision-taking being in the hands of the citizens. In this sense, we're also talking about public procurement, as well as the issue of cooperation acting and affecting the cities and their inhabitants directly. The second item, the second element I wanted to mention related to the right to city is the current situation on the conflicts, or the existing conflicts. As Irene said, I believe it would be important to include in the treaty mediation instances. We need to recognize international arbitration to solve these conflicts, those disputes. Mediation should be placed at the local level to find a way to include local instances for decisions so that the communities that have been affected can directly participate in the arbitration process. This too is an important aspect that should be considered as a solution for compensation, reparation, and other obligations that the corporations should fulfill. And also, I am also thinking of some actions, such as the actions of local governments. I'm also thinking of urban planification and the regulation of the market, above all the real estate market. And I believe it would be a good idea to include some details of this kind to make sure that the local governments can take a more active role when it comes to holding these enterprises accountable. Therefore, I think that the contributions of the cities can be very useful in terms of the social function of the city and of the city as a space of political participation, of extended citizenship, as well as the actions on the respect of human rights and also the strengthening of the power of the citizens when it comes to decision taking and social control. This was a brief summary of what I wanted to say, but the discussion will continue in other spaces. So we will keep following these processes that we keep building with all of the organization have already been working for a long time on the UN treaty. And hopefully in the Council on Human Rights, we might also include a council coming from the cities and working on the obligations that the international corporation would have to satisfy. Thank you so much, Nelson. I believe that this conclusion completely satisfies our expectation, that it summarizes everything very well. So as you said, we're going to keep working together. And with this, I will conclude this virtual side event. I would like to give a hugely thanks to all of the panelists, the organizers, the interpreters, and obviously to our participants that have been listening to from several parts of the world. And we will share the recording of this webinar so that many more can listen to it. We have also shared in the chat box the announcement of another side event organized together with the Transnational Institute that deals with the mobilization of the North of Africa And we would like to invite you there too, because the Northern Africa has taken a key role over the last 15 years when it comes to defending human rights and local peoples. That is what we're going to discuss in that said event tomorrow. And with this, we're going to conclude. Thank you so much again. We will stay in touch and have a great evening or a great day. Thank you.